You're watching News at Prime. Let's pick up on this now. South Africa has recorded economic growth of 0.4% in the second quarter. The figures from Statistics South Africa show that finance, real estate and business services contributed positively with a growth of 1.3%. Trade, catering and accommodation also increasing by 1.2%, while manufacturing also rebounded. Meanwhile, transport, storage and the communication sector contributed negatively with a 2.2% drop. Agriculture, forestry and fishing also falling by 2.1%. Exports, on the other hand, decreased by 0.4% and imports increased by 1.7%, largely due to vehicles, vegetables, textile and mineral products. Economist Professor Waldo Krugel reacting.
I think we need to cast our minds back to the second quarter when there was still significant political uncertainty ahead of the election. And in that sense, it dampened economic growth at a time when consumers have been knocked flat now for basically 2 years with high inflation rate and high interest rates. So given that, the 0.4 is not bad. And these numbers lag the feeling that's currently out there in the economy. Since then, there's been a lot more optimism, and we've seen it in the markets. The JSE is doing much better, and the rand-dollar exchange rate is much stronger. But it hasn't translated into real economic activity and numbers that are currently being published. So it's a bit backward-looking, and hopefully we'll see better numbers coming up in the next month or so.
Well, let's talk more now on those GDP numbers, and we speak to the Center for Development and Enterprise Executive Director, Ann Bernstein. And good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Let's start with that positive news of the marginal growth of 0.4% to South Africa's economy. Is this a sign that plans to grow the South African economy are beginning to yield results?
Well, I think we have to look at this in a much bigger context. There's been a positive reaction to the formation of the GNU and the hope that there will be considerably more determination about reform, essential reforms. I think we have got, Eskom is doing better, and we certainly don't have load shedding. Although those people like me who live in Johannesburg, we have something the city calls load reduction, and every now and then you just don't have any power at all. So I don't think we're out of the woods at all. And I think you've got to, the big picture is that a few weeks ago we were told the unemployment numbers for the quarter, which went up. So we now have some 12 million people who would like to work if they could find a job. And I don't think there's sufficient urgency in the GNU yet. I'm not experiencing it as a citizen. I think we have to recognize that we're not in a normal time. The country is in crisis in almost every direction you look. And yes, I want to be optimistic, but we're not doing enough yet. Yeah. We're not moving fast enough. Transnet's not transforming fast enough. So there are a lot of things that are not going well, and the Reserve Bank says we're going to have growth of 1.2 or 1.3 this year. I think we need to be very realistic about where we are, and we need to keep the pressure up on the politicians and the decision makers to make the reforms that we desperately need.
I'll come back in a moment to GNU, which you raise, and those very grim unemployment numbers. Let's stick with Transnet for a moment, the entity you've just mentioned. Structural problems remain in the South African economy, and key among them is indeed the logistics sector. Transnet, it continues to have problems with equipment shortages and maintenance. Does Transnet continue to be a drawback to the South African economy, in your view?
Absolutely. We know that. We know that because the most senior businessmen in the country are stopping what they're doing to run their big companies in a turbulent global and local environment to help the government run the country. And part of their priorities is to fix logistics, the most important part of which are the ports, the rail, and other things. So, yes, this is still affecting the economy. It seems to be getting a little bit better in some parts of the logistics sector. But I read the other day that, remember, we all got excited that Transnet was going to bring the private sector in to help deal with ports and rail. Well, they announced the other day that this wasn't really working and they haven't signed the deal. And although this had taken 2 years, now they were going to go back to the drawing board and do this in a different way, and this would take another 3 years. So I'm not very excited yet. I think if you look at all the indicators, we're not making sufficient progress quickly enough.
Yep.
And it's that sense of urgency that we have to get the right people in place. We have to almost be ruthless in terms of making sure we've got the best people in the country to run the big companies. And I don't think we do yet.
I wonder where we are going to find those ruthless people. Let's talk about the jobs numbers. And they are very clear that South Africa continues to fail to create jobs. How big a risk is this to social stability?
It's catastrophic for the country. It's catastrophic for the individuals who can't find jobs, who work very hard looking for something that they can get. It's catastrophic for the communities, for their families, and it's disastrous for the country. We should be getting a youth dividend, but we're not, because we don't skill people up sufficiently and because we don't look at our economy and say, how do we make this economy grow much, much faster and in much more labor-intensive ways wherever we can? That, we need the top end of the economy to be competing globally and doing all the things that we want, but we need much more flexibility so that we can hire people who have, through no fault of their own, very few skills. And we're not taking this seriously. We have probably the highest unemployment rate in the world. This in any other country would be number one priority. But South Africa wants to do this and we want to do that, and we have many other priorities. Growth and employment should be the absolute top priorities. And here again, I don't think there's sufficient urgency. So I'm optimistic about the GNU, but 2 months on, we need to see much greater focus and much greater sense of urgency throughout the cabinet. And I don't think we have the best people in the country in the cabinet, and I don't think we're thinking in the right way yet about the crisis that the country is faced with.
Yeah. 2 quick questions before I let you go, Anne. You talk about the youth dividend. In fact, I think that's borrowed from the United Nations. That's how they describe countries that have a youthful population. And in South Africa, many of them are unemployed and some find themselves turning into crime. I just want for a moment to quote something that was said by the police minister in Parliament today, Senzo Mchunu, who says, extortionists do not want to find work. Instead, they prefer terrorizing communities. Is that our reality now, that people would rather turn to criminality for survival as opposed to trying to get an honest job?
Well, we shouldn't generalize too much. We have extraordinarily high crime rates, and there is extortion, so-called construction mafias and all sorts of development mafias, if you like. And this is a consequence of appalling governance. We had a police minister who didn't seem to know how to run the police force, but he liked to appear at every incident around the country. Hopefully the new minister will do a better job, but that's what's needed. And we need to, I think differently about how we tackle policing in this country. We need to decentralize a lot more where there are entities, cities or metros that have capacity. I think we need to look at that.
Yeah.
But we need a much more effective approach to policing. And that starts again, I'm afraid to repeat myself, it starts with, do we have the best people, the DG, the top officials, provincial officials? Have we got rid of corruption? And are we serious about having a police service that really does the job? And that requires trust in the community. And you won't trust police if they're corrupt. So we've got to cut through these vicious circles in decisive ways. And that's what the GNU has to deliver, and very fast.
Yeah. Very briefly, and less than a minute, if you can, the positive sentiment that you speak about, some suggest that it is linked to the recent electoral outcomes which have produced the GNU. Do you think that we are able to capitalize on it quickly enough for us to attract foreign direct investment?
It's difficult to invest in South Africa if you can't get your goods to market. The GNU, that's the hope, and we're certainly doing everything we can to back this GNU and hope that there is increased momentum for the reforms that we need. I think the jury's out at the moment. I'm not sure yet. It's a hope. It's a hope.
Oh, yeah, it's a tough one. Ann Bernstein, thank you very much. Not holding back on the cautious optimism, perhaps, is where we should is the way we should phrase this. Ann Bernstein, the Executive Director at the Centre for Development and Enterprise. All right, it is that time when we get a sneak peek into what's coming up on In Focus. The anchor